Director of the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, and I would like to welcome you to our presentation and artist talk, which is a part of programming for Reagan Kemp's solo exhibition, War Dog, Teeth, Thorns, and Iron, that is currently on view within the gallery. So we will start the evening with a presentation about the Potcake as a symbol in Bahamian art, and then directly following the presentation, we will have a artist talk, some Q&A with our lovely artist Reagan Kemp. So we can start. What is a potcake? So in War Dog, Teeth, Thorns, and Iron, the potcake, or Reagan's dogs, who are potcakes, huh?
No, but that's okay.
No, but who are dogs? And
they don't discriminate.
Pardon?
So they don't discriminate.
They don't discriminate. No, but the dog is a central motif in Kemp's practice, specifically within this exhibition. And we thought, as the national institution who has a mission to educate, we thought that it would be a great opportunity to present on the ways that dogs, specifically potcakes, have arisen in the Bahamian historical canon. And just for those who don't know what a potcake is, we wanted to take time to define it. So a potcake is not a formal breed of dog. Potcakes are known just by William J. Fielding's research. They have mixed ancestry. They are a locally defined dog category shaped by mixed ancestry and live conditions in the Bahamas. Potcakes are often associated with informal ownership. As for those of you who navigate throughout the province, you know that the same potcake you feed on Monday is probably at your neighbor's house on Tuesday begging for food. And you may have like a kin or a connection to a dog, and they may be around your house for like a week, 2 weeks, and then the next month you see them down the road with their other family. So they don't have a specific ownership in that way, and they are roaming in public presence, making them highly visible in daily life. So you would see them, like I said, roaming the streets. What I've noticed about potcakes is that they stay within very specific communities or like a traveling range. And potcakes carry cultural meaning. The dog functions as both a literal subject and socially recognizable figure. As we were researching, and I have to interject to give credit to Ryan Farquharson and Anna Harris-Smith, who put this presentation together and did very extensive research, that they presented that archaeological and historical sources indicate that dogs may have been present in the Bahamian archipelago since the Locayan period and early European contact. So I think we have to set up to think about where did these dogs come from? How did they then interbreed to then form this new hybrid species of dog? So we can go to the next slide. Also, as we say, the potcake is a cultural figure. The term potcake is specific to the Bahamas. I know that throughout the Caribbean there are other names for them. I believe in Trinidad they call them pothounds. In Brazil they're called viralato or viralata caramelo. Forgive my pronunciation, but basically because of the skin color of the dog being that brown color, the name is then associated with that. So any and even in Martinique and Dominica and other regions within the Caribbean, you would find a stray dog. They are also a cultural symbol. They also have prominence in the art from those spaces as well. But like I said, we're going to focus specifically on their presence in Bahamian art and life. So because of their ever presence, there were actually laws, regulations imposed because of their visibility. So by the 19th century, dogs in the province were increasingly shaped by taxation and licensing systems tying dogs to public governments. So just to regulate the amount of dogs, given their breeding habits and so on, there had to be legislation in place. In 1856, dogs were labeled a public nuisance. That's kind of harsh
crazy.
terminology. But in New Providence legislation showing how dogs' presence became publicly debated and regulated, these measures were often unevenly enforced and disproportionately impacted poorer communities, contributing to the Potcake's role as a contested urban figure. So we'll see then how in some of the artworks that are displayed in this presentation that you'll see the difference in how dogs and the Potcake is presented. One of the beautiful things about being a national institution that covers art is that our research then lends us into other areas like literature, dance, film, theater, etc. And over Ryan and Nenaway's research, and with some direction by our executive director, Malin Ford, we came upon William J. Fielding's research about Potcake dog ownership in New Providence, the Bahamas, which helped us craft language around the laws and regulation. That Fielding's research and studies showed that dogs are most frequently reported in poorer areas of Nassau, though dogs are present island-wide. And this uneven visibility means dogs often function as markers of lived urban space rather than neutral background elements. So the message is that dogs share human space more directly than many animals. They occupy streets, yards, doorways, and neighborhood edges, making them visibly unavoidable. Potcakes carry emotional contradiction. They can signal affection, neglect, survival, nuisance, companionship, or vulnerability depending on context. And I think that's important to note as we even engage Kemp's work as well in the exhibition. You'll see the varied ways in which she renders her dogs, even though they have specific ownership to her. You can see the companionship, the affection, the vulnerability, and I think we'll go into deeper investigations of the work so you can see the other side of that as well. This flexibility makes dogs an open subject in art. They can reinforce realism or support deeper reflection on care, value, and coexistence. So the fun part. Patterns observed in Bahamian art. Dogs appear as everyday presences in domestic streets, often grounded in artworks in this Bahamian space rather than idealized imagery. In other traditions, dogs serve as narrative companions, participating in scenes of community life and interaction. In contemporary practices, dogs may operate as ethical or metaphorical figures, reflecting the broader cultural ambivalence Fielding documents around Potcakes. Dogs can symbolize violence or patterns of resistance, fueling broader ethical narratives. So what I love about this piece in particular by Clive Stewart, Clive is a Bahamian visual artist. I'd say that because his practice is so expansive. Clive came up in the 1980s where he would have studied at the College of the Bahamas, then went on to study at RISD. And one of the things about Clive's practice is that there's no subject that he doesn't touch. So he said he makes work on everything from war to food shortage to our urban communities. And as we're having conversations about these communities, the dogs come up as a form of representation. And in this work, two dogs, you can see that the dogs here are a little malnourished, especially the one in the front, which would prompt us to believe that it is a Potcake. When you think about how not having ownership, how having to rely on multiple sources of food, whether you can get it or not, would then cause the parents of the dog to be a little frail. So you could see if you can see in the audience, the ribs of the dog in the front being shown, and also the halos around their head to show this kind of reverence, because halos usually refer to religious iconography. And what is beautiful about Clive's work is that you see, though the dogs are not situated in a very specific community, so we can't say, oh, that's East Street or whatever. The homes and the way that they are presented with the wooden slats on the left-hand side gives us an idea of the urban environment that these dogs should be situated in. So this is a great painting to help reinforce that history that we just covered about the presence of dogs in urban environments, and then what that means to our understanding of these communities. And what is so beautiful then about these two works, specifically in conversation, East Street Dog by Clive Stewart and Amos Ferguson, Walking the Dog, like I said, Clive's work touches a little bit more in even though it's like cubism in a way, cubism/realism in his practice. Amos Ferguson's work, Amos Ferguson is a Bahamian painter, but I would call him a visual artist. I mean, he painted on everything. You know, there was no surface that he left untouched, so I will relegate him to a painter, but he is known as one of our more prominent intuitive artists, where he was self-taught. A lot of his visual language came through dreams. They came through interpreting the Bible, biblical scenes, political commentary, social commentary, and folklore. And what I think is beautiful about the difference in East Street Dog and Walking the Dog is the presence of the leash in Amos Ferguson's Walking the Dog. So we can tell that this, what appears to be a poodle versus the pit bull or pit bull-esque dog of East Street Dog, is this difference in ownership. The environment that Clive rendered the dog in has a very specific tie to a community. So we can think about all of the communities that surround East Street. So Bain and Grant's town, East Street then being such an historic road, being a thoroughfare for items coming in through boat because of the way that it starts by the water and then goes all the way to the next end of the island. And then it's like very like overt, like Bahamian cultural symbolism of Junknu, of the line, the clothes hanging on the line, and it pushes us into a very specific community, whereas Walking the Dog pushes us into almost the opposite side. So there's no visual markers of urbanization. There's no visual markers of, there's a difference between the palm tree in Amos Ferguson's work versus the lack of greenery in a very specific way in Clive's work. Even the nature of the two dogs, you would think of the poodle being a more socially acceptable dog. You think of the poodle as a pet for a specific group of people. It's like a class marker as well, versus the pit bull that is seen as more territorial, more violent, and you associate the ownership of a pit bull with stereotypically a specific group of people. So this this dichotomy, I think, further then gives us an opportunity to look at the variations of how dogs, even like hybrid then dogs, are treated. Because there are dogs that are bred, like, I think it's like the French, what are they called? The French Bulldog, right?
Oh, the Frenchies?
The Frenchies. Let's call them the Frenchies. But they are bred to look like that. And so they can be called potcakes if we were, to think about it literally. But there's a difference between like that kind of breeding for aesthetic versus breeding that happens because of a lack of ownership, a lack of regulation. Would you go to the next slide? And then we go into work that kind of forces us into thinking about the themes that comes up in Reagan's work. So one of the overarching themes in War Dog, Teeth, Thorns, and Iron is violence. Reagan situates violence as a necessity, situates violence as an unavoidable event. Specifically, even thinking about like spiritually, it's violence. Yeah, there's unavoidable. There's a deity tied to violence, friction, and so on. And I believe that these works help us to enter into that line of thinking. So you have Potcake 8 by Heino Schmid and Matthew Reming, Nigeria. Stop me if you've heard this one before. So in Heino's work, Heino Schmid is a Bahamian multidisciplinary artist. A lot of his work is cultural commentary, but one of the things that is beautiful about Heino's work is a lot of the scenes that he paints is real representations of real life interactions he's had in Chippenham, specifically where his studio is. And in talking to Heino about his potcakes, he said that this work in particular is because there was a dog on the side of the road. Whenever he passed it, it just would get jumpy and freak out, and because dogs get very territorial. The dog became territorial, showed teeth, and then he took that incident and made work about it. But in Matthew's practice, dogs are a symbol of West African heritage. They are a symbol, I think he uses them as almost as a vehicle of self-portraiture. So he uses the dog as a way to symbolize himself. Tethering that balance between dogs that are tender, dogs that are pets that you could pet, and then also the symbolism of dogs are something that you have to be aware of. When you see a sign that says beware of the dog, you know that there's probably a dog that is meant to attack you if you cross a line wherever that sign appears. What is also, I think, really beautiful about the difference in how Clive and Amos rendered their dogs versus Heino and Matthew is that the line work and the lack of detail creates energy in the work. So you could feel the tension and the violence and the, I'm gonna say I think tension and the movement that is associated often when you see dogs in communities, either barking at your tires as you drive, or they're behind a fence and you walk past and they're attacking the fence. So we can go to the next one. Yes, and then we're here finally in a space where we're going to begin discussions about Reagan Kemp's practice, but another artist that used the symbolism of the dog in their practice is LeVar Monroe. And LeVar's use of the dog is very expansive in that he uses kind of like a multiple history of the dog. So LeVar's practice, because he's in between the US and the Bahamas, he refers to a time in the US and throughout the Caribbean as well where during the slave era dogs were used to hunt, seek out, and used to enact violence upon formerly enslaved people. And even to this day, the dog is also tied to law enforcement where they hunt, sniff out, and also are used as attack dogs when it comes to crime prevention. So there's this cross intersection of what happened in slavery times versus what is happening now, and LeVar uses the symbol of the dog as a way to just highlight that, to highlight it. And this LeVar Monroe, and when the dogs went silent, you can very clearly see that the dogs are not silent in this work. And he is using the dog to expound on this viciousness, this this viciousness, this territorialness, this proclivity for violence, this proclivity to attack, this uproar, barking, and what that then does to create tension and to create fear within people and in environments. Then you have Reagan Kemp's rage has left her quiet home in my body. She demands to be seen. You have a self-portraiture where Kemp is looking at almost like a shadow of self, and within the head, within the mind, you have these two dogs going at it, which symbolizes like almost like a mental torment and a mental tension, a mental friction, symbolized through the dog. You have the paw print, the snail print. I believe that's the 3 legs, the 3 feet, the webbed feet.
Yeah. Bird feet.
Bird feet. Bird feet in the work, and all of that refers back to kind of like this domesticity, survival, predatory instincts, and so on. So I hope that this, and we could, I think that we could go back to the beginning. So I think that ends our presentation on the history of the potcake as a symbol in Bahamian art. So thank you for allowing us to give you that context before we dive into these questions. You will, just because I did not print out your bio, can you give us just like a little 3-liner about you and your practice? Doesn't have to be long.
I'll do my best. My name is Reagan Kemp. I am a multidisciplinary artist. I've worked in a lot of mediums. I just like to try things, I guess. I like to, give the idea a chance to come out in the way that I would like. So lots of mediums. I think the through lines that are running through my practice currently are heritage, ancestry, nature comes up a lot, ideas of gender, and then they all just kind of like mesh into whatever concept or idea is being examined. So that's what's going on.
Yeah. Good. So in the presentation, we discussed the portrayal of dogs within Bahamian artworks. How has your perception of, I would say your perception and the symbol of the dog, because I know that this is the first time in your practice that you're really exploring this, but from like artwork 1 to finish of the exhibition, how has your perception of the potcake, the dog, evolved throughout the making of this body of work?
I think it began to be a bit self-referential in a way. Like, I definitely examined it against the backdrop of like Bahamian art history and the Bahamian art canon in the ways that it was used. Like, I'm a huge Hino fan. Like, I love Matthew's work, so I'm aware of like a lot of the ways that it's been used to represent different things and the different energy that symbol can carry, even though it's like the same animal. As we mentioned in the presentation, like connotations of violence exist, but also like vulnerability, almost like a statelessness, like a wandering energy to it. And yeah, I began to think of it less as, I think initially, because I wasn't like much of a dog person before I got my own dogs, I saw them as like this violent, threatening, almost like masculine symbol in the way that they showed up in the world. And I think in spending time with my own dogs and beginning to make the work, because a lot of my work is just self-portraiture, even if I'm not in the work, right? So it's kind of like how you spoke to the Matthew doing like a similar thing with using that symbol to portray his own, energies. It became like that, and I began to see the nuance in what that symbol could hold, and I think that kind of expanded my idea of what the dog could represent over time, because I started seeing myself in it, which was interesting. It's an interesting shift from like seeing it as this thing to be scared of, and then moving toward, it's me. Like it's like an interesting shift. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that happens like with anything that you spend time with, like whatever preconceived notions you have about it has to fall to the reality or the truth that is presented to you in your engagement with the subject matter or with the thing, right? And I think that that's so, it's a beautiful segue into my next question, because my next question is, what patterns have you observed in your own dogs that resemble human interactions?
A lot. I think in some ways they're very dissimilar to us. I think that we have to train to be like them in ways that they just are instinctively. Like you see it in like the military and the way they just line up and move and protect each other, and it's almost like they didn't have to learn that. They were puppies and they already like kind of moved in a certain way. They moved in like a sort of like synchronized way. It's very natural and like fluid. And I think that's something that humans have to learn. But on the flip side, there is just the way that they show affection. They're very affectionate, they're very intelligent, they're like surprisingly just like present and sentient beings. I think like that shocked me a bit because, again, you have like this one-dimensional idea of the dog is like this protector, this like angry, snarling beast, and then you have like this dog that's like jumping up in my lap and giving me a hug. It's very like this 90-pound dog. It's just the gentlest being in the whole world. And yeah, that was another shift back to the first question. But yeah, just the way that they protect what they care for, I think was the biggest similarity that I noted. And the way they learn and grow and then shift and adapt to situations, it feels very, like it's easy to personify. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think we don't often think about how we have to learn from the nature around us. I think there's a lot of the human experience that's about dominating and having dominion, and I'm the owner and this is the pet, and I have to let these things like submit to me rather than seeing it as like a mutually beneficial experience where you give, you take, you learn, you impose, and so on. So thank you for that perspective. Our next question is, violence is necessary in specific cases, and I think that is a loaded, I think I just have to like say for the sake of, that is a loaded statement to make, that violence is necessary. But in this question and in this context of the exhibition, that is something that you assert, that violence is necessary in specific cases. Within the cultural diaspora, and when I say cultural diaspora, I think this is like thinking about like Western culture specifically, like that, like very specific, like Black Atlantic thinking of things. How has violence shaped Bahamian identity? Which is a loaded question.
It's a heavy one. Yeah, I think the Caribbean is born of violence. You know what I mean? Like, we weren't the first people on this land. There were people here before us, and largely they were murdered and infected with disease and just like burned out of an established society. And then, as Afro-descended Bahamians, do we know how we got here, right? Like that wasn't a simple process either. It was extremely violent, extremely inhumane. And I think it continues on with neocolonialism and capitalism and climate violence and all of these things that are happening to us, and how that leads into the structures of like poverty systems that we were born into that are we're just automatically disadvantaged. And it's hard to see how that doesn't, affect the nation of people. And it's just kind of like, if you look at it, the violence is just all around, and you can't get stuck on it because it gets very hard to like continue. But I think it is also important to acknowledge that these things are happening and they're continuing to happen. Like we're stolen people on like a sinking island. It's just basically the reality of things, and that's rough, but like it is true. We're like disproportionately affected by climate change. You know what I mean? Like I think we're responsible for maybe like 2% of the emissions.
Yeah.
That's kind of insane. You just had a Category 5 hurricane, and it's like the truth all over the Caribbean, and these systems are at play like heavily on all of these islands, and it's it's rough. It's a rough one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll definitely shape a nation's identity, just like the resilience necessary and the way we have to kind of keep moving forward in the face of all these things. But things with like, it's like coming of age, lesson you gotta pick up on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's
distinct stuff to it.
sorry, just like letting it sit on me because I was like, yeah, for sure. Like war and peace are peace makes you see that no, peace does not make you see that war is necessary. I was gonna say a false sense of peace makes you see that confrontation is necessary, and then confrontation makes peace necessary. So I think it's very beautiful that there is like a spiritual law and spiritual like understanding attached to that, and that actually like makes it that makes it like simple for us to like grasp, like that was so I think you beautifully answered that question, my next question, so I'm going to skip that. So survival is a common theme that echoes across African diasporic nations. How does it arise in your work, if it does?
Yeah, I think it does. I think especially in like the recent works, right? But all of them actually, because I think the first major body of work that I made was largely about the survival of like memory and tradition and ancestry, and that's the thing to like thinking less like in the physical sense and more, metaphorically. But yeah, I think it's just cool to think about that we're all here because somebody survived something. You know what I mean? Just especially as like Afro-descended people, that's like a big reality, and that starts to take like a whole lot of weight. I think it shows up in a lot of the motifs that I make use of, especially in this last body of work. I think like I think I'm asserting that violence is not really like violence is necessary. I mean, I think in that, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but it's more so that violence exists and defense is necessary. That's what I'm trying to. Yeah. I think I'm trying to put forth in that is we're faced with all of these very difficult situations, and how do we just, how do we help ourselves out of them? How do we like defend ourselves? Do we just like, like we gotta put our hands up. We can't just like keep toting punches. And I think that's the through line that's coming through there. I think the machete is a beautiful callback to that as well, because again, we need the land to survive. We need food. We need to grow things. We need like that cultivation to survive. But we also need protection, like physical protection. We need all of these things. So it becomes like that. Yeah, that through line shows up again. And that was a good question. I like the question.
Word to Anaway.
Yeah, shout out to Anaway.
Yeah, and we are coming on our last question. So if there are any questions in the audience, please get those interrogative brains working. How can we continue to preserve our African identity and traditions within the Bahamas?
I think that's a tough one. I mean, just the acknowledgement of it, I think, is a great starting point. I think there are a lot of, I think Africanness is sort of like the antithesis to capitalism. I think the two things kind of have a hard time existing at once, because when you think about African society, you're thinking about like communal nature, we're thinking about actual nature, respect for the land, like respect for your elders, the carrying on of like family lines, ancestry, heritage, like all of these things are coming up. And capitalism says like, keep moving, make money, like just keep going. Exploit. Exactly. So I think just stopping and sitting and like in that thought is important. I think continuing some of those ideals. I think a lot of the form of spirituality that I speak about in my work is respect of nature. A lot of these deities are essentially just forces of nature. There's one for the wind, there's one for lightning, there's one for thunder, there's one for the river. There's, you know what I mean? And like in personifying it, you see how the energies can react if we don't respect them. And we're seeing it happen like very visibly. And I think that's another very cool thought. But just, yeah, continuing to acknowledge how it exists in some of the words that we use and the food that we eat in our festivals in Junkanoo, you know what I mean? Like, it's everywhere, but I think we can forget or downplay it, and we gotta just keep it
Present.
present in the forefront. I think spaces like the NAGB, like art institutions, also help to keep it like in sight, you know, like breaking down all these different artworks and like the education around it, because I think like the history of it is very very important to know. I don't think like a lot of people know like how expansive that can get and how much it still like stays with us today. And yeah, we just got to keep it in view, I feel. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, I think that that's a beautiful note to end on, to keep like the genesis of our identities in view. And all genesis lead to the continent. So yeah. So are there any questions in the audience? Was it thorough enough? You gotta let the information ruminate on your brain a little bit. That's fine. Reagan will be here and you can ask all the questions afterwards. So I just want to thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for for listening. Thank you, Reagan, for being such a great panelist. Thank you for sharing your insights, sharing your wealth of knowledge, and sharing your work with us. I also want to thank once again, Anaway Harris-Smith and Ryan Farquharson, also Rich Alcira and Reagan Farrington, Johnny Beadle, and Ahmad Rule, who's outside, and our executive director, Malin Ford, for their continued support in efforts like this and talks like this. Please, the exhibition will be up until I think about mid-March, so if you have not seen it, please go and see it. And yeah, have a great night, everybody. Yeah.